When the Prophet ﷺ returned to Medina, he began sending out small expeditions to every remaining temple in Arabia to destroy the idols. Over the next 6 months, the entire Arabian Peninsula was gradually cleansed of shirk. By this time, the enemies of Islam had been defeated. Mecca and the Kaaba, the spiritual heart of Arabia, were now under the Muslim control. And the Muslim state had grown wealthy and powerful in a way no Arab kingdom had ever achieved. But such success carried danger. Prosperity often leads to comfort and arrogance. Nations rise, become complacent, and forget gratitude to Allah. This first Muslim state, meant to be a model for all who came after, had to avoid those same traps of corruption. It was then that the command came down. Every able-bodied man was to prepare for an arduous campaign. The target lay far to the north, in the scorching heat of summer, just when the farmers of Medina would normally harvest their long-awaited crops. It was clear that joining this expedition meant lost harvests and financial hardship. Only those who were ill, elderly, or had a valid excuse were permitted to stay behind. And even the enemy they were marching to face was not precisely known. Yet an army of 20,000 gathered, the largest force the Muslims had ever assembled. Supplying such an army required enormous funds, so the Prophet ﷺ called on the believers to give what they could. The response was remarkable. Umar ibn al-Khattab came with half of his wealth, thinking this might finally be the day he would surpass Abu Bakr in charity. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, however, brought everything he owned, leaving nothing behind for his family except trust in Allah. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, who had once arrived in Medina with nothing but the clothes on his back, contributed a vast sum from the fortune he had built through trade. Uthman ibn Affan outdid all of them, donating 100 fully equipped camels and a pile of gold. Even the poorest believers contributed. Abu Khaythama of the Ansar spent the night drawing water from a well, earning only 2 handfuls of dates. 1 handful he left for his family, while the other he gave to the army. The hypocrites, the munafiqun, they mocked his small offering, but in Allah's sight, it was far greater than their ridicule. They asked him, "Do you think Allah needs this quantity of dates?" But Allah defended Abu Khaythama's honor and revealed verses that are recited to this day.
الذين يلمزون المطوعين من المؤمنين في الصدقات والذين لا يجدون إلا جهدهم فيسخرون منهم سخر الله منهم ولهم عذاب أليم.
But the munafiqun themselves gave nothing at all. Instead, they invented excuses for staying behind. One even claimed he could not march north into the Roman lands because he would be unable to restrain his own lust and desire for their women.
ومنهم من يقول ائذن لي ولا تفتني ألا في الفتنة سقطوا وإن جهنم لمحيطة بالكافرين.
Other munafiqun began urging the soldiers not to set out at all. It is too hot, they warned, claiming no one could survive the scorching heat from the summer march.
فرح المخلفون بمقعدهم خلاف رسول الله وكرهوا أن يجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله وقالوا لا تنفروا في الحر قل نار جهنم أشد حرا لو كانوا يفقهون.
And then there were those who longed to go but had no mount to carry them. They came to the Prophet ﷺ pleading for camels or horses, yet the army's resources were exhausted. With nothing left to give, he sorely sent them back. They turned away with their eyes overflowing with tears, grieving that they could not spend their lives in the path of Allah.
ولا على الذين إذا ما أتوك لتحملهم قلت لا أجد ما أحملكم عليه تولوا وأعينهم تفيض من الدمع حزنا ألا يجدوا ما ينفقون.
The army now had left Medina and was making its way north towards the Roman Empire, a long, difficult journey through the heat and sand. Eventually they made it, arriving in the lands of Tabuk, and there the Prophet ﷺ began forming alliances with the Christian tribes, sealing off the northern border against any potential Roman invasions. It was only a few years later that the Romans and the Ghassanids fought the Muslims at the Battle of Mu'tah, but now the Muslim army was nearly 10 times bigger, and they were making their presence felt. They stayed there for 20 days as a show of force before finally taking down their tents and making their way back home. In total, the expedition took about 2 months to complete. Although no fighting took place, the heat, the distance, and the lack of water in many places made this the most difficult journey the Muslims had ever been on. And when they finally returned home, it was a time of celebration. They had just been put through the fire and they came out having passed the test. Everyone deserved a moment to relax. But out of nowhere, a man came running to the Prophet ﷺ. He was one of the great Sahaba who had followed the Prophet ﷺ in nearly every expedition. While the Prophet ﷺ was in Tabuk, he had asked where this man was. Now the man came begging for forgiveness. Something had happened that had made him stay behind in Medina. And soon the Prophet ﷺ realized the gravity of the situation. Ka'b ibn Malik was one of the poets of the Prophet ﷺ, dedicated to defending his honor and spreading the message of Islam. In the Battle of Uhud, when the Prophet ﷺ was nearly killed, Ka'b swapped his armor with the Prophet's own armor so that the enemy would think he was Muhammad and go after him instead. This was the level of loyalty that Ka'b had to Islam, and no one could take that away from him. And just like every other battle he was called to, when the expedition for Tabuk was announced, he was planning to join the Muslims. But as time passed, he procrastinated, telling himself that he would begin preparations the next day. This went on for days and weeks until the day of departure arrived. His horses were fast and he knew he could always catch up with the army, so he continued to procrastinate. After a few days of delaying, the realization came to him. There was no way he could catch up with the army now. So when the Prophet ﷺ eventually returned with his army, Ka'b went to him to tell him the truth. Over 80 people lined up to give the Prophet ﷺ their excuses for not coming, but those 80 people were all from two groups. Either they were old, weak and frail, or they were among those accused of being munafiqun. Ka'b was from neither group, which put him in an awkward position. When he approached the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet smiled at him, but behind that smile, Ka'b could see a glint of anger. So Ka'b told him the truth, and the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah would decide his fate. That night, an order came to boycott him and 2 others who had done the same. No Muslim could speak with Ka'b or those 2 other men, nor could they do business with them. People could not say salam to them or even acknowledge their existence. They could not buy food, water, or clothes in the market. And when they went to the masjid, the Prophet ﷺ would not even look in their direction. For 40 days, all 3 of them lived like ghosts, constantly trying to get people to notice them. But after 40 days had passed, things got even worse when they were all ordered to separate from their wives. Ka'b's wife then went to live with her parents, and now Ka'b was completely alone. This went on for another 9 days until he could not take it anymore. He went to the house of his best friend, Abu Qatada, the man who grew up with him and learned Islam with him. Ka'b begged him to respond, and he shouted, "Do you know me to love Allah and His Messenger?" But his friend then replied, "Allah and His Messenger know best." And then he walked away. Ka'b began to cry. He had reached his breaking point, and even his best friend was doubting him. The next morning, Ka'b prayed Fajr alone on the roof of his house, afraid to pray at the masjid with the rest. And as soon as he finished praying, a man began shouting from one of the hills, "Ya Ka'b ibn Malik, rejoice!" At that he knew his trial had ended and he fell into prostration at once. He quickly rushed to the masjid where the people received him and greeted him, hurrying to congratulate him. His repentance had been accepted. Allah had just revealed an ayah in the Quran in which the three men were told they were forgiven.
وعلى الثلاثة الذين خلفوا حتى إذا ضاقت عليهم الأرض بما رحبت وضاقت عليهم أنفسهم وظنوا أن لا ملجأ من الله إلا إليه ثم تاب عليهم ليتوبوا إن الله هو التواب الرحيم.
This was a gift from Allah, and He had now granted it to them. They became among the very few to know they were forgiven while still alive, but there were also those who were not forgiven. Every 10 years or so, a new ideology comes to attack Islam, whether it's liberalism or feminism or capitalism, communism, consumerism, scientism, secularism, individualism, or even, of course, the promotion of sexual perversions with ideologies such as the LGBT movement. And so in this book I'm writing called The Entire History of Islam, I have a chapter dedicated to the colonization of the Muslim world by Western powers. But it wasn't just the physical colonization through military might or the enslavement to the banks through debt traps, but there was also colonization of the mind of the Muslims through the use of all of these ideologies that take our children away from Islam. So in this book, I will explain how each of these ideologies came about, and I will respond to each of them with the Islamic stance on them and how Islam differs in its lifestyle. So for example, when I'm talking about capitalism and communism, I have a whole explanation on how the Islamic economy works. Or when I'm talking about feminism, I give an explanation of the roles of men and women according to Islam and how authority within the marriage contract works. So go to my website now and pre-order the book. Will literally write your name into this book, an honor for you, because you are one of the very first people to support this project. Something special for the people who pre-ordered this book during this Ramadan only. When the Prophet ﷺ initially announced the expedition to Tabuk, he began collecting funds for the army to purchase food, supplies, and camels for the soldiers to ride on. But the munafiqun of Medina refused to donate their money and gave excuses why they would not be able to join the journey. At the same time, however, as if to show their disdain for the Prophet ﷺ, they began collecting money amongst themselves for their own selfish project. They started building a new masjid in Medina, a place where the munafiqun could gather without being disturbed by the Muslims. The building was completed even before the Muslim army set off for Tabuk, and Allah referred to it as Masjid al-Dirar, meaning the Masjid of Harm. This time, the one who organized the building was not Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, the old king of Khazraj. Rather, it was led by Abu Amir al-Rahib, one of the old elites of Aus before Islam. Long ago, he had converted to Christianity, hoping that he was the long-awaited prophet. But when Muhammad ﷺ was chosen as that prophet and arrived in Medina, Abu Amir left the city and even joined the Quraysh in the battle of Uhud. The Prophet ﷺ then changed his name from Al-Rahib, meaning the monk, to Al-Fasiq, meaning the corrupt or sinful one, showing who this man really was. Abu Amir al-Fasiq then sent a letter to Ibn Salul asking him to build a masjid for himself. This became a place where the munafiqun could conspire and a headquarters from which Abu Amir al-Fasiq could grow his influence. Ibn Salul invited the Prophet ﷺ to pray 2 rak'at in it, trying to convince him to bless it as an official masjid. But there's no doubt that the Prophet ﷺ was suspicious of his intentions. So he simply said, "We are busy now preparing for travel. If Allah wills, when I come back." But Allah did not will this. When the Prophet ﷺ was on his way back from Tabuk, he revealed ayat in the Quran about this.
والذين اتخذوا مسجدا ضرارا وكفرا وتفريقا بين المؤمنين وإرصادا لمن حارب الله ورسوله من قبل وليحلفن إن أردنا إلا الحسنى والله يشهد إنهم لكاذبون لا تقم فيه أبدا لمسجد أسس على التقوى من أول يوم أحق أن تقوم فيه رجال يحبون أن يتطهروا والله يحب المطهرين أفمن أسس بنيانه على تقوى من الله ورضوان خير أم من أسس بنيانه على شفا جرف فانهار به في نار جهنم والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين.
Soon after this, Ibn Salul fell ill and passed away. And his son asked the Prophet ﷺ to pray his janazah, not wanting to disappoint the son, who was a righteous Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ agreed to pray for him. Umar then asked the Prophet ﷺ why he would do that when Allah had forbidden it in the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ replied, "Rather, Allah has given me a choice and I have chosen to ask."
استغفر لهم أو لا تستغفر لهم إن تستغفر لهم 70 مرة فلن يغفر الله لهم ذلك بأنهم كفروا بالله ورسوله والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين.
He added, "If I knew that praying 71 times would secure forgiveness for them, I would pray 71 times." After this, Allah revealed another ayah, and praying for the munafiqun was then completely forbidden.
ولا تصل على أحد منهم مات أبدا ولا تقم على قبره إنهم كفروا بالله ورسوله وماتوا وهم فاسقون.
Ever since the Muslims survived the Battle of Khandaq, a steady stream of delegations arrived in Medina to either establish diplomatic relations with the Prophet ﷺ or to embrace Islam. But after Mecca was conquered and the enemies of Islam were rendered powerless and defeated, that stream reached its peak with representatives coming from all over Arabia. Each tribe had its own story and each eventually became Muslim. Even Banu Thaqif from the city of Ta'if came and declared that they had accepted Islam. Then there were the Christians of Najran, the place where the people of the ditch were thrown into pits of fire. They sent a large delegation of about 60 Christian scholars, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed them to sleep and pray in the masjid. Discussions with these Christians lasted for days, and Allah revealed many ayat in the Quran answering their questions. They asked whether Ibrahim alayhi salam was a Christian or a Jew. So Allah responded,
ما كان إبراهيم يهوديا ولا نصرانيا ولكن كان حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين.
They still kept asking questions, refusing to accept Islam. So Allah sent down the ayat of mubahala.
فمن حاجك فيه من بعد ما جاءك من العلم فقل تعالوا ندع أبناءنا ونساءنا ونساءكم وأنفسنا وأنفسكم ثم نبتهل فنجعل لعنة الله على الكاذبين.
At that, they refused the challenge and went home the next day. They were among the last delegations to visit the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was now the 9th year after Hijrah, and the Prophet ﷺ, still busy with the delegations, sent Abu Bakr to lead the first Hajj. But as soon as he left Medina, Allah revealed nearly 2.5 pages of Surah At-Tawbah, and these ayat were directed at the Arab pagans. So the Prophet ﷺ sent Ali ibn Abi Talib to convey this message and deliver the new ayat to Abu Bakr. When Ali caught up with him, Abu Bakr asked the famous question, "Have you been sent as a commander over me? Or am I still the commander?" Ali replied, "No, you are still the commander, but I have come to recite Surah At-Tawbah." This small interaction would have monumental consequences, helping resolve a theological debate that still rages in the Muslim world today. Who should lead the ummah after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr or Ali? It's almost as if Allah orchestrated this event to clarify who was the commander. Abu Bakr then carried on with his duties, leading the Hajj, while Ali recited these ayat to the people. From these ayat came 4 major announcements. Number 1, no one shall enter Jannah other than a Muslim. No disbeliever shall enter Jannah. 2, no one shall perform tawaf naked. 3, no mushrik shall ever perform tawaf again. And 4, any existing treaty with the pagans would remain in effect for 4 more months. After this, there would be no treaty unless a pre-set time clause existed. It was now the end of the road for paganism, and one way or another the Arabian Peninsula would be cleansed of shirk. While in Islam there is no compulsion in religion and the people are not required to become Muslim, the Arabian Peninsula holds a special status as a sanctuary for Islam. This is where the Haram is and the home of the Muslims. And paganism had already had a history of defiling the Kaaba. Idol worship could no longer be even a remote possibility. And with the exception of a few Jews and Christian tribes who were not considered pagans, all the Arabs became Muslim. With these rules in place, the table was set for the Prophet ﷺ to perform the first and final Hajj. The next year, the Prophet ﷺ announced that he would be performing Hajj, and soon flocks of people came out behind him. Tens of thousands of people joined him on his journey from Medina to Mecca, and along the way, a continuous stream of people kept following. Never in the entire Seerah had so many people joined the Prophet ﷺ, and this time, it wasn't for war, but for worship. This was the answer to the call that Ibrahim alayhi salam had made so long ago for the people to make pilgrimage to the Kaaba. This would become known as the farewell Hajj, even during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Throughout the entire journey, he was constantly bidding farewell to the people, though no one truly understood the implication. The Prophet ﷺ arrived at the city at night, so he camped outside, preferring to enter during the day. The next morning, on the 4th of Dhul Hijjah, he prayed Fajr and performed ghusl before entering the Haram. There, he performed tawaf 7 times, the first 3 quickly and the last 4 slowly, then prayed and walked between Safa and Marwa. He remained in Mecca for 4 full days. And on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah, he made his way to the valley of Mina. On the 9th day, he went to Namira in the morning, waiting until Dhuhr to enter Arafah. There he prayed Dhuhr and Asr together, 2 rak'at each. Then he stood at the foot of the mountain for hours, making dua until the sun set. During this time, he delivered the famous farewell khutbah, though he also gave khutbahs on other days as well. There is a common misconception that the Prophet ﷺ gave only one farewell khutbah during the farewell Hajj. In reality, he gave several, so his advice could reach all those who had joined him. When the Prophet ﷺ finished at Arafah, he traveled deliberately slowly towards Muzdalifah. There he prayed Maghrib and Isha, combining the 2 prayers. When he finished, he lay down to rest until it was time for Fajr. After praying, he made dua again. When the sun rose on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, he went to Al-Ma'shar Al-Haram and glorified Allah while facing the Qibla. He then went to Mina to throw 7 pebbles before proceeding to the place of sacrifice and slaughtering 100 camels, 63 by his own hand and the remaining 37 by the hand of Ali. The meat was then distributed to the poor and the needy. Most books you'll find on Islamic history are extremely bland and boring and often hard to read. And so that's why I've paid special attention to the storytelling in the book that I'm writing called The Entire History of Islam. Islamic history is full of emotional moments, from the glory the Muslims would have felt that day when they conquered Constantinople to the great misery and fear that they felt when the Mongols invaded their lands. These were moments of joy and jubilation, and these were moments of extreme sadness and depression. Heroes that brought victory and justice to the land, and villains that massacred the people and brought destruction to their people. And when we read through these stories, we need to understand the emotions that they were going through as well. We need to understand the fear that Umar ibn al-Khattab had when he was given responsibility over the ummah. No longer did he have the Prophet ﷺ who was receiving direct revelation from Allah. He was on his own with the weight of the world on his hands. And we need to understand the joy and the jubilation that those Muslims would have felt as they finally liberated the city of Jerusalem after 100 years in the hands of the Crusaders. This is what I've been trying to bring the ummah over the last 5 years with my videos on TikTok and YouTube. I've written hundreds of stories about the Muslim ummah, and I will be applying those same storytelling techniques that I've learned over those years to this book, so that when you read this book, you too will feel what your ancestors felt as they were overcoming the most dire of circumstances. So go to my website now and pre-order the book. I will literally write your name into the book, an honor for you, because you were one of the very first people to support this project. Something special for the people only who pre-ordered this book during this Ramadan. O people, lend me an alternative ear, for I know not whether after this year I shall ever be amongst you again. Therefore listen carefully to what I am saying and take these words to those who could not be present here today. O people, just as you regard this month, this day, and this city as sacred, so regard the life and property of every Muslim as a sacred trust. Return the goods entrusted to you to the rightful owners. Hurt no one so that no one may hurt you. Remember that you will indeed meet your Lord, and He will indeed reckon your deeds. Beware of Satan for the safety of your religion. He has lost all hope that he will ever be able to lead you astray in big things, so beware of following him in small things. O people, it is true that you have certain rights with regards to your women, but they also have rights over you. Remember that you have taken them as your wives only under Allah's trust and with His permission. If they abide by your rights, then to them belong the rights to be fed and clothed in kindness. Treat your women well and be kind to them, for they are your partners and committed helpers. And it is your right that they do not make friends with anyone whom you do not approve, and never be unchaste. O people, listen to me in earnest. Worship Allah, say your 5 daily prayers, fast during the month of Ramadan, and give your wealth in zakat. Perform Hajj if you can afford it. All mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have any superiority over an Arab. A white has no superiority over a black, nor a black over a white, except by his piety and good actions. Learn that every Muslim is a brother to every Muslim, and that the Muslims constitute one brotherhood. Nothing shall be legitimate to a Muslim which belongs to a fellow Muslim unless it is given freely and willingly. Therefore, do not do injustice to yourselves. Remember, one day you will meet Allah and answer for your deeds. So beware, do not go astray from the path of righteousness after I am gone. O people, no prophet or apostle will come after me, and no new faith will be born. Therefore, O people, reason well and understand the words that I convey to you. I leave behind me two things, the Quran and the Sunnah. If you follow these, you will never go astray. And O Allah, be my witness that I have conveyed your message to your people. And as part of this khutbah, the Prophet ﷺ then recited to them a revelation from Allah that he had just received, thereby decreeing that the foundations of Islam were now complete.
اليوم يئس الذين كفروا من دينكم فلا تخشوهم واخشون اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا فمن اضطر في مخمصة غير متجانف لإثم فإن الله غفور رحيم.
With the Hajj now complete, the Prophet ﷺ had shown the people the last of the 5 pillars of Islam. Scholars often interpret this as the meaning of perfecting the faith, as until then, this pillar of Islam had remained without a prophetic example. When he then finished his khutbah, the Prophet ﷺ asked the people, O people, have I faithfully delivered my message to you? And the crowd roared, and the valley filled with voices affirming, O Allah, yes. The Prophet ﷺ then raised his forefinger and said, O Allah, bear witness that I have conveyed your message to your people. The writing was on the wall, and undoubtedly the Prophet ﷺ knew that this was the end, but no one could have imagined it would really happen. On the 13th day of Dhul Hijjah, the last day of Hajj, the Prophet ﷺ performed his final tawaf before returning to Medina. 2 months later, he began preparing a new army to send to the Romans, this time to the lands of Syria. It would be led by Usama ibn Zayd, the son of Zayd ibn Haritha, who had been adopted by the Prophet ﷺ and later killed in the Battle of Mu'tah. Some of the Muslims began to complain about this decision, saying that he was only 17 and not a Qurayshi, and that his father had been a freed slave. At this, the Prophet ﷺ rebuked them and said that they had said the same thing about Zayd. And what a skilled and courageous leader Zayd ibn Haritha turned out to be. The Prophet ﷺ told Usama, go to where your father was killed. He would be fighting the people who had defeated them at Mu'tah, the Ghassanids and the Roman allies. The army of Usama then began its journey, destined to enter the lands of Palestine. But as they were traveling through the desert, only a day or two away from Medina, a messenger caught up with them and delivered frightening news. The Prophet ﷺ had fallen gravely ill, and so the army of Usama quickly returned to Medina. For the first few days of his illness, the Prophet ﷺ continued to lead the prayers in the masjid, but his head was swelling, his fever was rising, and he began to shorten the prayers and return home immediately afterwards. The people of Medina noticed these signs and they began to worry about what was going to happen. This was their ruler, their guide, their judge, their prophet. Without him, they would receive no revelation from Allah. The divine light of this world was about to be taken, and they would be left to wander in darkness, lost and alone, without a shepherd to guide them. They remembered the days before the Prophet ﷺ came with his message, the days of Jahiliyyah, before the advent of Islam. They used to kill their brothers and bury their daughters alive. They would perform tawaf around the Kaaba naked and worship statues their own hands had carved. Each day the illness worsened and the Prophet ﷺ began to show signs that death was near. The people that began to camp inside the masjid, as the Prophet ﷺ's house was attached to it, separated only by a curtain. Soon the masjid was crammed and filled to the brim as people waited for any news. Finally he came out, carried by Ali and Abbas, and he sat on the mimbar and began giving advice to the Muslims. He said, "May Allah's curse be upon the Jews and the Christians because they took the graves of their prophets as places of worship." Clearly fearful what the Muslims might do to his own grave when he was buried. He then told them, "If I have hit anybody unjustly in my whole life, then here is my back. Come and hit me now before the day of judgment." Over and over he repeated the same command. "If there is anyone who has any right that I have not fulfilled or any debt that I have not paid, come now and ask me before the day of judgment." And eventually someone stood up from the crowd, speaking only because the Prophet ﷺ insisted so much. He said that one day a beggar passed by and the Prophet ﷺ did not have any money. The Prophet asked the people if anyone could give charity on his behalf. The man said he gave the beggar 3 dinars, but the Prophet ﷺ had not paid him back. So the Prophet gave it to him then to settle his debt. These were little things, but they meant so much to the Prophet ﷺ. Any small injustice required that something must be done to correct it. The Prophet ﷺ then announced, "Let all the doors of the masjid that open from private houses be closed except for the door of Abu Bakr." This was an honor and a privilege that the Prophet ﷺ gave to Abu Bakr, clearly a sign that he preferred him over others. Then came the handover of leadership in the prayers, passing the baton to Abu Bakr. The Prophet ﷺ led the Maghrib prayer that night, reciting Surah Al-Mursalat as the last out loud prayer. He then went to his room and lay on his bed resting until it was time for the next prayer. When Aisha came in, he tried to stand up on his feet, but his knees buckled and he fell back onto the bed. 7 times he tried to stand, but each time his body refused. So he told Abu Bakr to lead the prayer instead. In the last 10 years that the Prophet ﷺ lived in Medina, no one else had led the prayer in that masjid while the Prophet ﷺ was present. This was a clear sign to the people that something monumentous was happening and that Abu Bakr was being chosen as his successor. The Prophet ﷺ came out of his house one more time to join Dhuhr prayer the next day. Abu Bakr was already leading the prayer, so the Prophet ﷺ sat beside him and even motioned for Abu Bakr to continue. But Abu Bakr, out of humility, did not comply and insisted that the Prophet ﷺ lead. The Prophet ﷺ then took the position of Imam. He led while seated with Abu Bakr standing beside him, the 2 of them alone in their own row in front of the rest. After the prayer, the Prophet ﷺ sat on the mimbar and delivered his final words of advice. "I command you to take care of the Ansar, for they have been the best advisors and they have fulfilled the duties that were due upon them. Treat delegations that will come to you with the same hospitality that I have shown to other delegations. Make sure you treat future converts the same way that I have treated them, and you should have good thoughts of Allah when you are about to die." These were the commands that he gave to the people. Before he left them, he offered one final piece of advice. As-salah, as-salah. Prayer, prayer, and fear Allah with regards to the weak and the oppressed of society. And with that, he was carried away from the mimbar, never to leave his home again. The next morning, the Prophet ﷺ woke up and asked his wife Aisha how much money he had. She searched through the pouches and wallets and found 7 silver coins, the value of only a couple of dollars. He took the coins and turned them over in his hand, asking himself, "What will I say to Allah if I meet him with these coins?" He then gave them back to Aisha and told her to give them away before falling unconscious again. When he woke up, he remembered the coins and he asked, "Have you given them to the poor?" But her mind was on her dying husband and she had not left the house. He then fell unconscious again. And when he woke up, he asked her once more, "Have you given them to the poor?" Realizing how important this was to him, Aisha went out to fulfill the Prophet's last wish. All that remained in his possession was his mule, a little barley, some armor, and a cup. It was now Monday morning, the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, when the Prophet ﷺ woke up for Fajr. He suddenly had a boost of energy, and he asked Aisha to help him up, and he made his way to the curtain. And sitting down, he opened it to see the Muslims in prayer. This was the first time they had seen him in 2 days, and a small commotion arose. When Abu Bakr stepped back to allow the Prophet ﷺ to lead, the Prophet ﷺ simply motioned for him to continue. They said his face was beaming with joy, and that a smile stretched across it. Perhaps this was his proudest moment, to see the ummah continue without him, confident that they would hold on to Islam after his passing. He sat there watching them, holding on to the moment. Then he returned to his bed. And as the hours passed, his fever rose again, and the sudden vigor that he had faded. His daughter, Fatima, the only one of his 7 children still alive, came to visit. He whispered to her in private, "You shall be the first of my family to meet me, and you shall be the leader of the women of Jannah." So she smiled out of joy. This was a prophecy that later came true. She died 6 months after him. Then came the pangs of death, and his fever reached a boiling pitch. He began drifting in and out of consciousness, repeatedly making dua. "There is no God but Allah. Verily, death has its pangs. O Allah, help me overcome the pangs and the pains of death." And he began to repeat the kalima, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." And his voice became a whisper. So Aisha placed her ear near his lips, and he was saying, "With the Nabiyyin and the Siddiqeen and the Shuhada and the Salihin, the prophets, the people of truth, the martyrs and the righteous." And he repeated this dua, "O Allah, forgive me, have mercy on me, and allow me to be with Ar-Rafiq al-A'la. O Allah, forgive me and have mercy on me, and allow me to be with Ar-Rafiq al-A'la. O Allah, forgive me, have mercy on me, and allow me to be with Ar-Rafiq al-A'la." These were the words upon which the Prophet ﷺ departed, calling out to Allah and asking to be taken into the company of the Most High. And as he spoke them, the angel of death came, and with one final breath, his whispers faded, and his soul was taken. The last and final messenger was now gone.